Hi, welcome to Renaissance Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Victor Vogel. This evening, I want to take just a few minutes. Now, I want to take some time to explain to you what's going on with leadership paradigm today and why it's not working, and what's frustrating that about people. And so maybe you can get a grasp on what I'm talking about when I talk about Renaissance leadership Odyssey. Renaissance is a new idea, a sort of a light coming out of the darkness into the light and seeing things that are exciting and different. They may even be a little scary, but they're different and exciting, and they're energizing and they're inspirational, and they motivate you to do some different things. The Renaissance, that's what happened in the Renaissance. We came out of the Dark Ages, very stochastic, highly regulated religious environment that was somewhat dark and sinister. And we began to go into art and music and literature and a bunch of other things. We began to evolve into a more comfortable, enjoyable learning world. I think that's kind of where I picked that Renaissance to talk about leadership because I think that's kind of what's going on with us now. We're, we've we've been in this sort of dark, stuck in a rut uh, approach to things, and we've only had one view of success, and we've only had one view of what a good leader looks like. And we've been pushing those concepts for decades about what we think a leader ought to be doing to be effective. Yet, for decades, not just recently, but recently it's become easier to share this information on social media. So you have Gallup and Pew and McKinsey and Harvard and a bunch of other research people presenting data that's basically saying on average across all companies and businesses, etc., organizations, when you sample people, they're basically saying, say employees, they're saying they're only about 30% engaged in doing what they are being paid to do. And when you take a look at further sampling and studies, you see that very much correlates with leaders and the employees' perception of leaders is those who tend to be somewhat satisfied at a fairly good level are only about 30% of all the employees. And the same true is about how employees feel about organizations in general. So there's a strong linear correlation to the what's causing that engagement to be low. And yet we've spent on an average $160 billion and probably more than that now over the last 3 or 4 decades, going into 5 decades, we've been increasing uh, the cost of leadership development on an ongoing exponential basis. And so we've been paying a lot of money to develop leaders. And what we have found is that when you ask leaders, have they learned anything new, you get a 25% of the leaders tend to say, yeah, I've learned something new. Uh, and then you have only about 20 or 25% that say, nah, it's not very helpful for me. And it hasn't impacted the organization that much. And then when you ask, how has it impacted the employees you lead? Have you seen improvement in employees you lead based on your leadership development? And that gets down around 19 or 20%. And and we've known that for decades. We've known people who go to webinars and seminar. Well, they went to seminars for years, the 70s, 80s, and mid 90s. And then as people got online, they started doing webinars. And if you did that today, you would probably get, you might even get lesser percentage of people who perceive they're getting some value out of watching a webinar online like we're doing right now. This is the problem we're struggling with because this is the preferred method of communicating people want. Uh, but it isn't necessarily delivering the results that people are looking for in organizations out of leadership enhancement. So, uh, during my years in consulting, uh, a lot of times when I was brought in, this is after having about 25 years of being a leader, even up to the C-suite level. But in the consulting arena, also working in that same level, billion-dollar organizations, international, domestic, variety of organizations, large and small sizes, a lot of them in the billion-dollar plus range. Um, what was happening was when I would be contracted to go to work, and I was a contract consultant. Okay, I was a independent contractor, often hired by other consulting firms or a company specifically direct if it happened to be a smaller one that I had the resources to handle. Uh, what happened is you're coming in and trying to resolve what the leadership in that organization perceives as a barrier or a problem to them being as effective as they could be. And so the first thing we do is we survey that organization and find out that, guess what? Um, yes, you had other consultants in, yes, and we're probably going to tell you the same thing I told you. You know, the problem hasn't been fixed. And it always was frustrating to those leaders when you're sitting there across the table and they've spent like $25,000 or something on a team building session, and you go in and say, it's not an effective team. I mean, at least that's what the data is telling us. And they go, well, I just had a guy in here doing team building. And we're going, well, maybe what they did wasn't as impactful as they were indicating it was. How did you know that? So we began to talk about that stuff, and it was through those discussions that I learned a lot about the idea that you can't go in and just run a team building session and build it and expect an organization to build teams. There's a lot more to it than just the basic team building perspectives, the things you to build a team. There's a lot about individuality of individual. There's a lot about the psychology of the team. There's a lot about the capacity. And one of the things I found was what you see up here is one of the major things that was consistently and is still today, and I see it in LinkedIn memes and posts across all of these areas where people are talking about leadership and development and coaching and counseling. I see it at the top of the list of so many things, and it is communication. But when yeah, you go in and talk to somebody about communication, they'll say, I'll say, I used to ask one question. It was always a great question. It's an open-ended list, a pretty good response. If there's one thing you could have your leader do better than they're doing now, what would that one thing be? And without a doubt, more than 70% of the time, it was, I want them to improve their communication. And so then somebody would go, well, we need more feedback, we need more active listening, and would create a team building or they create an educational program around active listening or feedback. And then it didn't work. And so that's kind of so what I discovered, uh, having an education and 8 years of background in education and communication, is that people weren't really learning about communication. We're learning about 5 key points that you need to do to have feedback be applied better, or 5 key things you need to do to actively listen better. But they did not understand how those 5 key points really impacted the whole communication process, how it could work for one situation and not another, how you as an individual would have a significant impact on the. In other words, they weren't learning the why or understanding the meaning behind it. And I still see it today when you go out and somebody says, we're going to do a communication course for you. They do not cover the 12 attributes that I have in my course as an entity of unit that says this is communication, the system of communication. And this is what we've been missing, and why my leadership paradigm shift change that I present to people, which is you need to look at leadership differently than you do today and in the current paradigm. And I explain what that means, and I'll put in the description where you can find the book Renaissance Leadership Odyssey. And the Renaissance is the aspect I use now, as I was saying earlier, because now I want you to be enlightened. I want you to know more about the underpinning about what makes communication effective and what makes it work and what doesn't. Because it is the premise of all the conflict that goes on in your personal life, your work life, the world in general. Okay? It evolves out of ineffective communication because people haven't grasped that. Now, so this is one of the things that was so key in my research the last 5 or 6 years, where I've been just generally informally going around meeting with people everywhere I could. And we would get in conversations and they would start talking about their work. And that led me to be able to kind of ask the open ended questions. Well, how is that business? I mean, I was up in Detroit for a while, up around that area, and I talked with a lot of automotive people, executives down to line assembly workers, and various bars, restaurants, pubs, park benches, wherever I could get a conversation going. It always came around to, so what's happening? How's it going? What's good about it? And you saw this divide between the employees themselves and the top of the organization. You saw the top of the organization when I was talking to executives over a beer or something, and they were telling me, well, we're doing this, we think it's working well. And I was talking with their employees at the same time, and the employees were going, nah, we're going to go on strike. So uh, that gap is, was what got me thinking. There's something that is prohibiting us from connecting to each other, and it has to do with two things. It has to do with leaders in general and how we view their role, because that's how we tend to connect with people in organizations. And they're all hierarchical. I don't care how you form them, there's levels of leadership, and that expands as you scale up. And that's why you find so much more trouble in larger organizations than you do smaller ones. Entrepreneurs, for example, don't have as many issues with communication leadership as they do if you happen to own a major restaurant chain across America with 5,000 restaurants. Um, so it's this lack of understanding of that connection and the role that leadership can play in being the glue that holds the organization together, but being another way to look at it is they're the nervous system that sends the signals to everyone else. So, how important would communication be in being able to do that? And it's not just important, it's absolutely essential. I mean, it's essential. It'd be like not having any nervous system in your body. How would you operate? Same way about an organization. And so we have spent so much time focusing on an approach to leadership. And I'm not going to go into that paradigm shift in this video because I'm just talking about what we're missing in the educational or the development side of building leaders. And if you want to understand the paradigm shift, you'll be able to go find the book and you can read that. And then if you want to talk to me, I'll be glad to spend it, whatever time helps you understand what you need to do in your organization. And most of the time, those chats are free unless you decide, hey, we want to actually do this stuff. Uh, but what that took me to was something like communication. uh, the reason it wasn't working time after time, the thing that made it more effective for uh, the companies I worked for when I went in with them is I went in and I basically managed the implementation or the transformation of that culture or leadership development program, team effectiveness program, whatever it was. I pretty much was in guiding how that was going to be executed. And I required everybody to spend some time with me understanding how to communicate effectively. What goes on when two people talk to each other? What are all the components? What are those 12 attributes? How do they interact with each other? For example, uh, you know, when we talk about communication, I talk to people, I say, have you had communication courses? Oh, yeah, we've had communication courses. I said, well, tell me about it. They go, well, I had active listening. And I thought that was a cool course. And of course, feedback is so important in leadership. And I had a course on how to, conduct feedback because you got to do that with performance appraisals and, conflict management and all that stuff. You have to, feedback's critical. I'm going, so why does feedback critical? What makes it work? And that's where it stopped. They tell me the the 5 or 6 steps that you want to do. You want to first open your mind and engage active listening. And how do you do that? What's important about that? Well, you have to show them that you're paying attention. Well, why does that work? What's important about that? Well, I mean, so are you telling me they don't think you're paying attention while you're talking to them? And we go through that discussion, and that's what was missing. What was missing was their understanding of really what made that work. Now, if we take that in the context of communicating with your employees, connecting with them to build trust in you as a leader so that they empower you to lead them, which is what you're searching for when you talk about highly effective leadership. Leaders who lead people, those people tend to empower the leader. They want the leader to lead them. They want to be able to rely on them. They don't want to be the leader. They want that out of their leader. But when they don't get it, they're very resistant to it. So part of that is how you can connect with those people. I mean, anytime you get more than one person together, everything begins and ends with interpersonal communication. It's just, you can't make things happen without it. Yet we spend virtually no time teaching people how to communicate. So we can't really fault people for being ineffective at communication, in my mind, because we really haven't taught people how to communicate. Now, since they were 2 years old, they've been able to listen and hear things. Okay. So it's kind of like I've been doing this for all my life. I kind of know how to communicate. And I'm going, no, you know how to hear and listen, but you don't necessarily know how to communicate because we don't teach you that. In kindergarten through the 12th grade in high school and in our school system, private, I don't care if it's private or public, you don't get things like what are the components of communicating? What are the attributes of communicating? When you meet somebody, you have two people. What's going on there when two people are talking to you? What are the real all the things that are happening? First of all, somebody has to say something to start the conversation. So what is the purpose of that statement? Why are you saying it? What do you want to have happen? How do you know that what you want to happen is what you're going to say out of your mouth? Uh, what is it? How do you formulate that in your mind? And then, how important is it for the other person to really understand what you're saying? What gives them the way of delivering that? The message delivery process. What could affect that? What could impact that? Like if we just cut off the video on this message right now and started talking to you. Let's see if I can do that. One second. Hold on. Oops, wrong thing. There we go. Now I'm talking to you and I'm delivering this message to you about the importance of really understanding why you communicate. So uh, I'm pretty sure that there's a difference between you listening to this and having one or two things that I might have put up on the screen there versus this, me being able to look at you and talk to you. And you beginning to see how I react. So there is how you create the message and what you want to say, how you deliver that message, all of the things that can get in the way, whether it's nonverbal communication where you can't see the person at all, whether you're doing it through a post, through a reply, through social media, whether you have time to do that, enough time to explain the complexity of communication, or you only have 240 characters to be able to try to explain what the hell happens when two people communicate? You can't do that 240 characters, folks. You can't do it and make it where people truly understand it. Talking about how you create the message, how you deliver the message, what are the barriers in delivering the message, what happens when we are incongruent in how we deliver it. I do this session with my granddaughter the other day, and I looked at her and I said, I want you to pay very close attention to me. And I want you to tell Granddaddy exactly what you think he means. Okay? Are you ready? And she stood there and she looked at me and says, are you paying attention? And she said, I am paying attention. I said, okay, yes. Now tell me what I mean. And she said, no. Quick, boom. 80% of the people I do that test with in any situation say no. Why? Because there's a significant impact of nonverbal communication. And there's neuroscience behind vision and the connection of the eyeballs to the brain and the impact that people have through vision on communication that we didn't even know about until 2000s when MRIs came into play. These are things that are now we know kind of impact what happens. That can be a very incongruent signal. If you did that and only, let's say, 70% of them said no, and I really meant no, I was thinking no, okay, and 70% of the people in that room said no. but you had 30%, okay, 3 out of 10 people on your team who said, no, no, he meant yes. You have conflict. Instantly, you have conflict on that organization. And you're going to have to resolve that. Where it had looked at him and said, I'm going to say no to you, and here's what I mean. No. If I said it that way, it's clear, it's concise. The nonverbal and the verbal language were congruent. There was no question. You'd have 100 out of 100 people tell you that that meant no. Okay. So, but why? Why is that work? Why is that so powerful? That actually is most communication research will tell you. My experience is about anywhere from 75% to 95% on an average. That's a broad range, but I've done thousands of those tests over years, over 40 years, maybe multiple thousands. Uh, Understanding why that congruency is critical to getting your message that you created in your mind to the other person. But then there's the other thing. What about that other person? How are they viewing it? So you have to know something about them, their cultural value system, where they're coming from, their attitude, their mood at their point in time that you're delivering the message. Whether you're trying to do that via where we can't sit around the room and have a sense of proximity or closeness about us. And that would be if you were sitting here with me now and I was doing that, you would experience something different than the way I'm presenting it to you now. So the preference is that one on one, face to face personal experience because it's hard to maneuver out of that. And you can't cut me off. I'm in there as your leader. You can't cut me. You can cut me off right now and you're done with this. And that's the end of it. And maybe you'll miss the point I'm trying to make. And that is we need to understand more about individuals and who we are. We need almost, I would call it psychological therapy over a period of months for anybody who is thinking about being a leader to understand the dynamics of leadership and who they are and what they're going to have to do and how they're going to have to think about it and how they're going to have to manage their thoughts and processes in order to impact other people, inspire them, and motivate them, the emotional intelligence side of it. And if you can't do that effectively communicating, you have what we have today. 30% engagement, 30% of employees are satisfied with organizations and leaders. This is what we've missed for almost the whole time I've been in this business. And it was more easily discovered as neuroscience began to explain a lot of how we behave, how our thought processes and nervous systems and bodies all interact together, and how that relates to how we engage with the external world. There's a lot to be learned about how things work and why they work that we have not been teaching. We have outsourced this. So once you outsource this, it becomes monetized, and people start trying to figure out one survey that will cover everything or one approach that will cover everything because it's efficient, it's effective, you can price it, it'll sell better, but it doesn't necessarily solve the problem. Time after time, I went in after organizations who have been through, spent so much money on these things. And then you're telling the executive, the board, my proposal is going to require you to put another 25 to $50,000 into this. And they go, what? We just spent that. I'm going, well, you look at the data. The data is saying you don't have any change. So I would suggest this time you make sure we're going to have change. So let's discuss how that can happen. And that's where a lot of this paradigm shift I've discovered came like 15 years after I left that business. I retired for 15 years, and I just had time to relax and think and mull over and do things, play with my grandkids and travel with them. But I saw and talked to so many people. I went in and did things that required me to be around people and continue to engage. And over time, because I wasn't under the pressure of doing an assessment or trying to meet a time deadline, I had time to think about it. I had time to take what I thought and look at the literature, and the literature was saying, yeah, that's right. And now we're seeing it again. I keep saying it on LinkedIn on and over again. I've been saying this for a couple of years. Women are going to be some of your best leaders in the coming decade. Why? Because the prefrontal cortex operates differently than men. It's formed differently. It's formed to make it easier for them to process all these things we're telling you that you really need to do to be effective. It's more difficult for men to do that and understand that. To show empathy is easier for a woman. Physically, it's easier. They're built for it. And now we can actually look at this and say, yeah, there's some science here. 40,000 studies, and yeah, I'm seeing this. So that the way they behave and the way they think, of most different chemicals that cause you to react differently and behave differently, and it's the way they think and the way they behave is tends to be more suited for what we're telling leaders they need to be able to do today, emotional intelligence. So guys, you're going to have to work at it. That's not that you can't do it, but we may be missing out on optimizing 53% of our workforce out there. There's probably more women in the workforce than men, but they're in those leadership roles as much as men are. And it hasn't been their capacity or their physical uh, potential. It's a cultural thing. It's a cultural thing that we've been living with. So, kind of the reason I'm spending some time talking to you is this course I put together on interpersonal communication is the communication aspect of those triads of psychology, a psychological profile, and emotional intelligence perspective, of being able to connect with people, and the capacity to do it effectively through effective interpersonal communication. Those are the three dynamics that are there. Two of those things I tend to send people to positive intelligence and emotional intelligence work groups that I feel are competent in, and I've looked at. I know they spent time doing that. One is Shirzad Shamid's Positive Intelligence Program, and there are people out there who are being trained to do that. The other one is Daniel Goleman's Emotional Intelligence Program, and there are people being trained to go out there and do that. And I try to tell people these people I believe can bring you in to the realms of understanding those two things you need. Now, in terms of putting those two things together with interpersonal communication, which is what I teach, and integrating them in a way that they become just a powerful weapon for leaders to use to inspire and motivate employees to gain that engagement, which is really what employees want. They want that family feeling. They love that family feeling. When they don't get it, unions are their alternative. And it's not that unions are bad, they're good. They're trying to protect employees against abuse, so to speak, or valued. But they're there because companies don't bring this together. And it's because we've been stuck in this paradigm that I discuss in Renaissance Leadership Odyssey for years and years and years, and we don't know how to come out of it. And most importantly, we have a massive $160 billion industry not wanting to come out of it, because that means they would have to change just about everything they're doing right now and retool to do this. But I'm telling them, don't let those companies do that. Bring your people in house. Bring uh, there's a person on LinkedIn I refer people to if as we begin to roll this out. Brian Grossman, I believe is Dr. Brian Grossman. Uh, he's one of those guys. I would say hire that guy into your organization at at a high level and have him run that aspect of your overall change process. Hire somebody to come in who's good at transformation and change, who's going to be putting this program together and sustaining it over a long period of time so that you do this stuff in house. Because that's what gets employees excited when they see that they have a potential and their visions are at the top. That's what gets leadership focused on building a community of people in the organization that can cross pollinate if necessary. There's so much that we need to change about how we view that leadership role that will enhance and optimize your whole organization, bringing women more, understanding. But even with a woman, if you bring her in, she needs to go through that psychological profiling process to understand, because all women are different from each other. They have to understand how to make the skill sets and the attributes we need to be a leader work for them with their people, and then how to make that work throughout the whole organization, up and down, and even outside of the organization, and to your shareholders. So you as leaders, as executives, you have two dynamics to deal with. You have running that organization effectively and smoothly to deliver what you say you want. But you have the same dynamic you need to develop. You need to know who you are as an executive. You need to know how that relates to the other realm that you're involved in, which is growing your business, your investors, your shareholders, uh, your industry as a whole, and your image and how you play out in that industry, and how that impacts your communities that you work in, and the world in general. Take the chip industry. Look at the impact that the chip industry's had on the whole world and how that impacts so many more people outside of that one organization called Apple or NVIDIA. Okay? It's bigger. And as an executive, you have to understand these attributes I'm talking about here in this communication course for two reasons. One, to grow your business, and two, to sustain and understand how you need to develop that in all of your leadership throughout your organization to sustain the growth and leadership. And the minute somebody comes in that doesn't understand that, you have Twitter, or better known as X right now, probably appropriately named. I'm sorry, stutter over that word. I'm 78 years old too, so I can stutter, and I can be ridiculed for it. But understand, saying when you're ridiculed. The the concept here is understanding what you're talking about. Don't go out there and think you can put five things about active listening on a slide and in 7.5 minutes get anybody to truly be able to actively listen. Frankly, if you, my understanding about how this works over the years of 40 years of doing this, uh, if you don't spend, or you shouldn't be spending, maybe 5% of your time active listening. If you're communicating effectively the first time, you don't have a lot of need for feedback and active listening. You'll watch it happen, and it'll happen right. We're selling active listening because we don't know how to communicate effectively to start with, and without it, it's dangerous. And you look at people who make a living at it. For example, I did a podcast with Gary Nessner, who is a retired FBI negotiator. He basically designed a program and trains people all over the world to this day in this. Active listening is his business. It is an attribute of all communication, but it is the most important attribute in his profession, and that's saving people's lives. Okay. But he also understands the importance of understanding the other person on the other side, how to start that process. And he understands you can't do that in an open with going cold, not knowing somebody going into that without having an active listening environment. So that's different than say in a new employee reporting to work, where already the employees subservient to the leader in the organization simply by the title that we put onto them today. All kinds of things like this, folks. We've got to rethink or rework. If not, we're not going to be ready for the upcoming fast-paced external world environment we're in. Yeah, and if you want to take this to a bigger level, think about it macro level, worldwide. What is the problem? What is the problem between the parties in our own government in the United States, between the countries that have different viewpoints of how they should be? It it has to do with individuals, it has to do with core values, it has to do with how you communicate those to other people. And then you have to be careful because guess what? We could actually take all of these 12 attributes and be exceptionally great at them. But if we were an unethical, absolutely horrible person, we could turn that around and use that against you. So it's about ethics and morality to start with. So all of this is what we discuss in these 12 courses. And I mean, 12 attributes in this course called Interpersonal Leadership Course, Interpersonal Communication Leadership Course. And, and there are 12 attributes to it. There are 12 classes, 12 weeks, 1 night a week, 2 hours a night. And I only have 6 people in each one of those courses for the 12 weeks, six. And those people are going to be intensely talking about communication and experiencing it and talking about the what worked, what didn't work, so that we can literally change this percentage that impacts the organization and impacts the people you work for. Because you're going to be able to go down and actually uh, translate or transition what you learned effectively into your organization, because you're going to be talking about how to do that. What's going to keep you from doing that? How can you overcome it? And how to do that? And most people try to rush it. They go in, they spend 4 weeks, it doesn't work. This takes time. It takes time to change. So, particularly if you're changing from bottom up, there's a lot of times why I work on just one department in an organization versus a whole organization to start with. Because once people see, hey, it's small enough to manage effectively in a shorter period of time. And then the impact of what they see often explodes into, I want that, and I want it right now. And then we have a bigger problem. We have to slow them down instead of trying to convince them to buy it. So, this is what I mean by a Renaissance leadership organization, one that takes a different look at what a leadership's role is, understand those three components that must be mastered effectively and is willing to change and build the organization internally that can make that happen. It's going to save you time, it's going to save you money over the long run. But most importantly, you're going to have more people who want to hang in there and stay with you and be part of who you are as an organization. Something I used to see back in the 70s, I saw deteriorate 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s. It's just, it was horrible to see the transition. And I was so immersed in it that until I got out of it for 15 years and looked back at it, I really didn't understand uh, how I was impacting it positively, but only with a few people. So now we have the potential to expose it to a lot of people, but it's not going to happen rapidly unless people buy into it, decide to do it, and go make it happen. Because one person can come in and make things happen for you, but that's got to permeate somehow out to the rest of the world faster. And down through small businesses can gain from this too. You're probably experiencing a lot of this in your early side, but I promise you, when you start scaling, if you want to grow and you start scaling, you're going to feel this impact that's going to falter. It's going to go away. You're going to feel the impact of that. And unless you just stay at that size, once you realize, hey, this is a perfect size, I'm earning enough money to live off, I love it, it's perfect size. But most people get that taste of growth and it takes over. And sometimes it takes over their common sense and their capabilities, and they find themselves struggling down the road. uh, Things like this, understanding this, talking through this, engaging in discussion and dialogue, getting all of your people involved in how to grow and how to scale effectively, not just the top, will be just, you'll see such a difference in their lifestyle. So that's what this podcast is about. It's about explaining the impact I've talked a lot about in the past about what it's going to take to be a Renaissance leader and some of the things we need to look at and some of the dynamics, maybe even the process of it. But I really never talked too much about the impact it's going to have in terms of individuals grasping and knowing so much more about why it can work. So that's what we have going. I've got two things playing with out there right now that I just rolling out this summer. One is the Renaissance Leadership Odyssey. It's nowhere I can see in any organizations out there. Now, maybe there's some best practices doing it. And you're sitting out there, if you're best practice, say, I do all that. I'm going, yeah, but you're in a minority, a big minority, less than the 1% minority. Uh, and congratulations. I'm glad you got it. Now, how do you get your industry engaged with it? How do you go out and help others? Or are you just going to hoard that for your own protection and competitiveness? See, a Renaissance leader, if they're having a lot of success, they want to spread that success because that success going out into the industry, into the community, only heightens things for everybody else as well as themselves. So these are dynamics. This course starts, I think it's September the 10th, somewhere in this on the calendar on my website. Website's up there, victorvogel.com. Go to interpersonal communication tab, and there's an enrollment form there. Is it expensive? I don't think it's expensive. I think it's a value at $750 a head. But and the way I basically designed it was there's 24 hours of instruction in interpersonal communication that's going to be invaluable to you in your business. But if you just try to bill it out on an hourly bill process, which I really hate doing, as I never did as a consultant, I never presented a project based on hourly billing. Uh, I think divide 24 into $50. I think you come around $50 or somewhere around there per hour. And that's about a graduate level university fee for going to a university for one of these courses. So I don't think it's unreasonable pricing. I'm not reducing it because it doesn't make much sense to do it any other way. Uh, but the course is good. I mean, I think it's going to get better. We got to get the first one under our belt here, and but I'm hoping we'll find 6 people that'll jump into this, and we can have a lot of fun. And at the end, we're going to have some time, to spend critiquing it, making it better, and that's how we do it. We're going to learn how to communicate with each other so that we can share how to improve what we're doing. So that will be very beneficial. And then, of course, hopefully that'll the word will get out. We're not going to record these, by the way. So there won't be anything coming back on YouTube or LinkedIn or anything where the course is available for you to purchase $20 or something like that. We're just not going to do that. So that that's what's happening with us going in. I'll come back and talk a little about each one of these attributes. I think I've already talked about some of them, I did one not too long ago about difficult people, and I'm offering that by the just that one attribute. I'm offering starting. I think I said August 1st, something like that. And the reason I'm offering that attribute is because we're, as a country, we're so engrossed in this battle that we're having. We're not talking with each other. So, if you've got family that you're a Democrat and they're a Republican, and you're having these battles, you're having these fights, you're having these arguments, some of this being able to understand the how to effectively use interpersonal communication to cope with difficult peoples in discussions, understanding the dynamic about how doing that. Um, I'm opening that up to 6 people to talk about that one course. If I get 6 in, we'll do a week. It's like I said, um, it's 2 hours for one night. And we can go longer if that's the case. If it helps people to interact more effectively, and then so I'll offer that probably 4 times a month over the next month. That's 12 classes of just that one area. Um, and then in September, that trimester, this whole course will be available to you. And it's a possibility that you may get in August and uh, take this one course and say, hey, I'd like to take the whole course. I mean, that's a possibility, but that's not how I'm offering it. I'm not offering it as a loss leader because I'm going to run that one course uh, in addition to the trimester as we go into September and October and into November. After November, I'll just stop it to stay strictly with the interpersonal communication course. But talking to people today is hard. It's difficult. And so, we can talk about how to do that more effectively. Okay, I'm going to wrap this up. I appreciate you taking the time to listen through all of this. If you have questions, in the description of the YouTube video here that I normally post on LinkedIn and everywhere else, I chart. I mean, there's no commercials in these, no advertising, and I'm not trying to generate money. Subscribing helps, but I really don't care if you subscribe. To be honest with you, I just want people to be able to get to these and when I do them and take away from them something. Now, I'm talking to you. It would be really great if there were four, five, or six of you talking to me on one of these sessions. And you could ask questions and we could dialogue and we could have a real good conversation about interpersonal communication, the role it plays in your life, your business, and your career. I think that'd be fantastic. If anybody wants to do that, you got six friends or something like that, and you guys want to sit around and shoot the crap about interpersonal communication, I'd be love to do that with you. So we could make it a podcast, put it on YouTube, and maybe somebody would get something out of that. That's a possibility. So you have a good day. Keep in mind, there's a lot more to interpersonal communication. There's a lot more to communication than what you think. If you haven't had training in it, and I'm willing to bet everybody that's listening to this has not, unless you are a communication student. And even then, you may not have had the experience that I've had at taking it and being able to change people's ability to connect more effectively. Those are things that you get with experience over 45 years of developing leaders. You probably won't get that in your college course, even with a PhD in communication. You won't get that kind of experience even. So, uh, just rapping helps sometimes. I don't know, but understand there's more to it. And I'll leave you with two axioms that I believe are critical about communication. And the first one is the meaning of the message is in the mind of the receiver. I'll say it again. The meaning of the message is always in the mind of the receiver. The second one is whenever there's more than one person involved, everything begins and it normally ends with interpersonal communication. I'll let you ponder those. You have a great evening.